Hey, what's going on guys? Mike here. Today I'm going to be showing you how I take the rim off of an aquarium and basically prep it to be a really good looking rimless tank. There's a lot of reasons why you would want to make a tank rimless, and I think a lot of people assume that when you take the rims off of a tank that you're compromising it structurally and you're just asking for problems. And the fact is that, you know, if you're working with tanks that are small enough, it's really not that big of a deal, and in some cases you don't need to do anything else to the aquarium to make sure it's safe. So we're going to be talking about all that as we go through the process of removing the rim off of this 20-gallon long aquarium. You guys might remember that the aquarium lab is going to have two 20 longs right next to each other, and this is the last one that we need to do. This is the second tank. We've already done one, so I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to show you guys how I like to do this. Now, let's start with what you need to do this. You don't need a lot. So first up here, this is probably the most important tool. This is just a paint scraper. It's a very thin one. Very thin, and that's important. There's different sizes, and if you get one that's too thick, it can be a little bit tougher to use. So just get the thinnest one possible, and I like this blade width. What is this, like 2 inches? Maybe it's 2.5 inches. So definitely gonna need one of those. The next thing you're gonna need is a bunch of razor blades. So just get a pack of 1 million of them. This is like 100 pack. Trust me, you're gonna need way more razor blades than you think you actually do. And then get yourself one of these little handheld razor blade holders. It'll save you from a lot of cuts. Last, and you don't always need this, but I think it's always handy to have a box cutter around just in case. But like I said, you don't always need it. Before we begin, I want to say one last thing, and that is that every tank is different, okay? This tank, the rims might be really easy to remove. If I got another 20 long, the rims might be twice as difficult to remove. It really just depends on the tank, okay? Tank size and the rim size also matters on, you know, how difficult it can be. Just know that every tank is different, and if this goes super smoothly, then, you know, that might not be the case. If this ends up being really hard to take off, then, you know, that still might not be the case. It might be a lot easier for you, and so you'll sort of see as we go through the process, and I'll explain as we go. But as you can tell, you know, the rim is still on this. I cannot pull it off. You can hear the silicone. It's still completely on there. So this is, you know, no tricks. It's not already removed, and I'm just sort of, you know, this is real life, guys. So we'll see how it goes, but just keep those things in mind. It doesn't really matter which side that you start with, whether you begin with the top or the bottom rim, but I always like to start with the top because it tends to be the more difficult one to remove. So I like to just get that out of the way first. What you're going to do initially is take your paint scraper and begin to punch it upwards into the top of the rim. You can start anywhere you want. You can start on a corner, or you can start, you know, anywhere in the middle of the rim. It does not matter. But you can see here, I'm just going to go through and, you know, very carefully press the blade up to the top until I can feel the silicone. And so on these types of tanks, there's silicone on the very top, and there's silicone. There tends to be a little bit on each side, so on the inside and the outside edge. And so what we're doing right now is we're using the paint scraper to break the silicone that's on this outside edge. And I'm gonna go through and just kind of slowly, one, you know, blade width at a time, and punch through the silicone, and you can feel it. And, you know, once, you know, you'll know when you're at the top. So once you get there, then you just move on another blade width, and you just sort of go along. Dragging the paint scraper through this portion is not really doable. The box cutter, sometimes if the rim is shallow enough and you have a long enough blade, you can get your blade up there and go through it, but with the paint scraper, it's not sharp enough to go through it like that. So now we're gonna make it to the corner on this front side, and the corners on the top especially are the hardest part because that's where the most silicone is. So you have to really press hard to get it up through there, and, you know, you're just going to do your best. So go up there and get through the corners as best you can. And I like to go through and do this like 2 or 3 times just to make sure I think that I have, you know, the blade all the way through and I have most of the silicone broken off. And you'll notice as I'm going around the tank just doing the same type of thing. I'm also pulling up on the edge of the rim slightly, and that's just to feel, you know, is this rim going to come off easy or is it going to be really hard? So sometimes a rim will, you know, not have much give and you're not able to get your fingers underneath it. In this case, and especially, you know, in smaller tanks like this, it's easy to get your fingers up underneath the rim because there's not as much silicone on a tank like this, at least in most cases. So I'm going through and I'm pulling up just to feel kind of where I'm at. And in some spots, you know, I'll hear the silicone tear a little bit. That just means that I'm pulling up the silicone where I didn't punch through all the way with the paint scraper. Once I get all the way through this top rim, okay, I've punched through as much of the silicone I can on the outside, I'll really start to go through and pull on the rim from the outside. And so now, you know, I'm just, again, I'm feeling, you know, where am I at with this? Am I getting close? You know, in this case, with what I'm doing on a tank like this that has 1/4 inch glass, I'm really not running any risk of cracking the glass. Now, you know, if you go crazy with this, you definitely have the chance of doing that. But generally speaking, with a tank that has, you know, 1/4 inch glass or whatever, or thicker, you're not going to be breaking the tank. When you're working with smaller tanks, like say a 5-gallon, the glass is thinner, and so you can definitely break the glass in that particular case. If during this process you are too tough on the rims when you're pulling up on them, you can do two things. You can accidentally break the rim, which is not really a big deal as long as you don't hurt yourself. You know, if you don't care about the rim being intact, then, you know, breaking it isn't a big deal. Just don't stab yourself. The other thing is that if you are too hard on it, remember there is silicone on the top, and so when you're putting a bunch of force on it and putting pressure on the tank, you can break small chips off of the top of the rim of the glass of the tank. So just keep that in mind. It ends up not being a big deal, you know, unless you take a huge chunk out. Just make that the back of the tank, and you know, it's not like you need to start over or anything. So just keep those things in mind as well. So once we've gone around the tank with the paint scraper on the outside, then you're going to go ahead and, you know, keep peeling up with your fingers. A lot of this is gently peeling up on the front rim once you break most of the silicone. There's still, the reason why it isn't coming off yet is because we still have the inside 4 corners that are attached, and then there's still a thin layer of silicone that's on top of the glass of the tank that is touching the rim. And so we can't get a blade under that, and really the only way to get that off is to, you know, do this pulling on the rim. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go through on the inside lip with our box cutter, and we're going to go ahead and glide it along here. It's easier to do it on this side than it is the outside, just because the lip is deeper out here. This can easily reach underneath here, and we can break this last layer of silicone before we get to the corners. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to attempt to punch out the 4 corners of the tank from the inside. So the corners have the big dabs of silicone that are in, you know, each corner. You can see them right here. And basically we need to break that because that's holding a lot of the rim together now, and that's pretty much one of the last things, along with the little bead that's on the top here. That's pretty easy to get off. As you can see, you know, our rims are, you can hear it, they're pretty much, you know, you can't feel it, so you don't know exactly what I'm feeling, but if you go on the inside, you know, there's a lot of movement here, and we're really close. It's just these 4 corners we need to get loose. So you go ahead and you take your paint scraper, or you can use a razor blade, whichever one you want, and then you're just gonna punch through those big dabs that are in the corner. So now guys, our rim should be getting pretty close to coming off. It's not gonna be super easy to finish this, but what we're gonna have to do is just, I like to start at a corner and just really get in there on the edge. It should now be at the point where you can get your fingers up under the corners pretty easily, and you're just gonna need to carefully and slowly begin to start pulling up on the rim. And you should get a feel for it if it's gonna come up or not. You know, if it's really giving you a ton of resistance, then stop, go through and try and punch out the corners with the paint scraper again. Maybe get your box cutter and do a little bit more cutting in there to try and break things free. You'll see that I did end up breaking the rim here, and as we go along the tank, I'll break it a couple more places. But you know, if you don't care about the top rim, if you never want to have it again, then it's obviously not a big deal. And it is possible to get the rim off without breaking it, but you just have to go even slower and, you know, do an even better job of breaking silicone, and it can be kind of tough to do that. So here in this case, again, I don't really care that the rim broke, and you'll see here that, you know, some other pieces break off, and that does actually make it easier to get the rim off when you have, you know, little strips that you can peel off, and then, you know, the whole thing just goes a little bit easier. Now let's flip the tank over and take the bottom rim off, which is a lot easier to remove than the top rim because we don't have the problem of there being silicone hidden up in the top where our blade can't reach. So here I just grab the box cutter, or you could use the paint scraper, or, you know, your little razor blade tool, it doesn't matter. And we're just gonna slide it along the inside edge here and break up all that silicone. And you can see here that even just by going on the inside here, not doing any work to the outer portion of the rim, it's already starting to come off. So, you know, again, the bottom part of a tank is a lot easier to remove than the top. Before we flip the tank over or do anything else, there's gonna be a lot of residual silicone on the edges and basically all over the tank. So this is where your little tool comes in with the razor blade, and you're just gonna go along and scrape off any big chunks that might be hanging off. And this is gonna help so that when the tank sits on whatever stand it's gonna sit on, it's gonna be level. And be careful of the edges, because if you have an edge that maybe doesn't have silicone or any, you know, small layer of silicone on it, it's gonna be very sharp. What we're gonna do is we're gonna sand the tank with some really fine grit sandpaper here in a second. But before I do that, I wanna get all these big globs of silicone off. You can see there's some big pieces over here. Once I have that done, I'm now gonna flip the tank over and begin to work on all the residual silicone that's still on the aquarium. I wanna start to work here on the top to show you guys. I think you guys get the gist of how to deal with the silicone and the other things. So you'll notice that there's a lot of silicone and it's very, very thin. We wanna remove absolutely all of that, because if we don't, we're gonna see it and it's gonna look bad. And this is where you're gonna need a ton of razor blades because they're gonna dull out really, really fast. So again, we have this pack of 100 over here. We should have no problem. We'll probably use, I don't know, maybe even 15 or 20 of them, no joke, even on a tank this small. So you do the same thing. You just go very slow and try and get all of it, and you need some good lights to be able to see it all, but after, you know, an hour of working on it, you should have everything pretty good. We're almost done here, guys. You can see my mess of silicone everywhere. We got, you know, everything pretty good. You can't see anything really if you look at the sides of the tank. And so now, you know, we have everything off. There's still a little layer up at the top, and we're gonna deal with that in a couple different places when we prep to brace this tank, which we'll get to here in a second. But now what I'm gonna do for my safety is to sand down the tank, especially the top rim, because that's where my arm is going to be when I get in here to escape it and, you know, just do tank maintenance. So this is just some 220 grit, you know, super fine sandpaper, and I'm just going to go around all the way around the top rim. And you can do the bottom if you want, or you can, you know, just make a point of getting the corners where you might end up, you know, catching a finger on. But I just focus on the top and I go through and just smooth everything out. And just like that, our tank is now pretty much completely done. A little pro tip for cleaning up all the silicone: get yourself a shop vac, or, you know, the tube attachment on your vacuum, suck up all that silicone, and then you can of course go take it out and, you know, clean it out, spray it out with a hose, and then you're pretty much done. The last thing we're gonna do before we finish this project, guys, is brace the tank. Now just know that an aquarium this size does not require any additional bracing to make it safe, but we're gonna do it. It's overkill, and I'll explain a little bit more about this once we finish this step. To do this, I have a piece of 1/4 inch glass, which is actually a little thicker than the tank itself, which is 4 mil, but you want to just try and get as close to the actual thickness of the aquarium when you're going to be making a brace. A little bit thicker is no big deal. If it was thinner than the tank, then it could be an issue. So just try and have a piece that is at least as thick as the tank itself. First, I center the brace and I mark off with a Sharpie so I know exactly where the brace will sit. Then I take my razor blade and I make sure to get absolutely every bit of silicone off where this brace will be positioned on the aquarium so we can get the best possible seal to the tank. I also like to add a little bit of isopropyl alcohol just to make sure I get all the residual silicone off of the tank. Then all you have to do is add silicone to where the brace will sit, just a thin bead, you don't need a ton of it here, and then we gently press the brace into position. When you press it into place, you will have some silicone that will squeeze out of the edges. I just use my finger to clean it up a little bit, and you can always go back once it's dried with a razor blade and cut off any, areas where a little bit too much silicone ended up, and you can make it look really good. Wait 24 hours for the silicone to dry, and your tank is done. You now have a rimless tank, it's got a brace on it, and it's all ready to set up. Before I end today's video, which ended up being a little bit longer than I wanted, I need to mention some things about the brace and removing rims from aquariums and stuff like that, because I know a lot of people, may be skeptical about whether or not this is safe, and so here goes my explanation for why we can do this for tanks that are like this. So this tank in particular, a 20-gallon long, this can also be said for a 20-gallon high, and tanks that are smaller than this, you don't need to further brace the tank once you remove the rim. It's not 100% necessary. Your tank will not explode if you don't add a rim. And that's basically because the tank is not large enough, the glass is just barely thick enough to support it, and it's sort of like a magical gray area as far as needing a brace or not. I've had a 20-gallon long that I have never put a brace on. It's been set up for 2 years, never had any problems. There's a little bit of bowing, but it's not enough to cause any problems. And so while it's not 100% necessary to add a brace to this tank, I wanted to do it because I wanted to demonstrate for those that maybe, say you want to do a 40-gallon breeder, or you want to make a 55 rimless. Those are tanks where you should add a brace, and so that's why we added a brace in this case, and just for peace of mind. It can never hurt to further brace your aquarium. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned something new. I hope my take on the whole, making a tank rimless thing is something that helped you out. Of course, there's other ways to do it, and I'm not saying my way is the only way to do it, so just keep that in mind. Do your research. If you really want to make a tank like this, go watch some other videos, see how other people have done it, and get more than just one take on the situation or the project or whatever. And I think that goes for a lot of pretty much anything in this hobby. Don't rely on one person's opinion, especially, or one person's standpoint or view on something. Go and cross-reference everything to make sure you have the best shot at getting the results for whatever you want to do related to this hobby. Thanks again so much for watching this, what turned into kind of a long video on how to make a rimless tank, guys. I appreciate it. Stay tuned for setting this tank up along with the other 20-gallon aquarium. That's going to be happening super soon. So thanks one more time for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.